At the quarterly town hall, my sister's name flashed on the screen. Cassidy Vale. Strategic partnerships, right above a new vendor I'd spent months trying to audit. She'd refused to let me meet her mysterious fiancé, said I'd ruin the vibe, and then suggested I skip her wedding entirely. What she didn't know was that her fiancé had used my identity once, and tonight, in a boardroom lit colder than a morgue, I would make them both say my name. Under oath. My name is Rowan Vale. I'm 32 years old, and my title is Director of Internal Controls at Hearthaven Capital, in the polished steel and glass ecosystem of our Greybridge headquarters. That title is a polite way of saying I'm the person who finds the rot before it brings the building down. My job isn't to trust, it's to verify. I live by a simple creed. Every number tells a story, and most of them are lies. My sister, Cassidy, 2 years my junior, lives by a different creed. Every story is a performance, and the truth is just a matter of lighting. She'd just been transferred to the Strategic Partnerships Department, a move she celebrated as a long-overdue recognition of her people skills. I celebrated it as a welcome transfer out of my audit-heavy division. For the first time in years, our professional paths didn't intersect. It was a relief that lasted exactly 2 weeks. That's when she announced her engagement. She did it, characteristically, over the company's internal Slack, posting a picture of a diamond ring on her hand, held by another, distinctly masculine hand. The caption was a breathless explosion of hashtags. He put airing on it future, Mrs. Mystery Cloud 9. The company channels erupted with digital confetti and congratulatory emojis. Later, in the glass-walled cafeteria, she floated toward my table, a human sunbeam in a canary yellow blazer. "You saw?" she beamed, wiggling her fingers. The diamond was ostentatious, a piece of crystallized ego that seemed too heavy for her delicate hand. "I saw," I said, nudging a piece of arugula around my plate. "Congratulations. Who's the lucky guy?" Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. "Oh, you'll meet him eventually. He's private, an entrepreneur, super intense." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried across 3 tables. "Just a heads up, Rowan, when you do meet him, try to keep the interrogation to a minimum. You have a way of asking questions that makes people uncomfortable." I raised an eyebrow. "My questions are usually about things like, what do you do? And how did you meet? Are those off limits?" "You know what I mean," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "You get that look. Your audit look." She straightened up, her smile back in place for the wider audience. "Anyway, it's going to be a huge wedding. Think fairy lights and champagne fountains. You'll love it." But a week later, when the corporate email blast went out, a save the date with a link to a password-protected wedding website, my inbox remained conspicuously empty. I searched my spam, my trash, every conceivable filter. Nothing. It wasn't an oversight. An email sent to an all-employees distribution list doesn't just skip one person, especially not the Director of Internal Controls, whose name is on more compliance lists than the CEO's. It was a surgical removal. I found Cassidy near the artisanal coffee bar, holding court with a few of her new colleagues. I waited until they dispersed before approaching. "Hey, Cass, I think there was a glitch with the wedding email. I didn't get one." She avoided my eyes, focusing intently on adding a precise amount of oat milk to her latte. "Oh, right, about that." She stirred, the tiny metal spoon making a series of sharp, irritating clinks against the ceramic. "I was going to talk to you." She finally looked at me, her expression a careful construction of regret. "Listen, Ro, the wedding, it's a whole vibe. Grant, that's his name. Grant, he's very particular about energy. We want it to be a totally positive, relaxed day." The unspoken words hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. "And my energy isn't positive enough for you?" "It's not that," she said, though it was exactly that. "It's just, you're intense. You'd be analyzing the floral arrangements for cost-effectiveness and auditing the guest list for potential conflicts of interest. It's your job. I get it. But," she took a deep breath, Maybe it would be better if you didn't come. The request was so audacious, so bluntly cruel, that for a moment I could only stare at her. She had disinvited her only sister from her wedding in the middle of a corporate lobby. "I see," I said, my voice flat, betraying none of the cold fury coiling in my gut. "Thank you for your honesty." I turned and walked away before she could offer a flimsy, insincere apology. Back at my desk, the sting of the insult was a physical thing. It was in that moment of raw, personal injury that the first professional red flag appeared. My system, the one I'd designed to monitor vendor onboarding and contract execution, emitted a low, polite ping. A new vendor had just been integrated into 3 high-value strategic projects. The company's name was Arcturus Ledger. They had been fast-tracked, bypassing the standard 90-day procurement and security review. The department that had sponsored them? Strategic Partnerships, Cassidy's department. An email from our CEO, Marcus Thorne, landed in my inbox a few minutes later, addressed to the entire leadership team. A huge congratulations to the partnerships team for their swift action in onboarding Arcturus Ledger. Their technology will revolutionize our back-end settlement processes. This is the kind of agility we need to stay ahead. Agility is what you call it when you want to celebrate breaking the rules. I was about to draft a reply inquiring about the bypassed protocols when a direct message from the CFO, Julian Croft, popped up on my screen. "Rowan, on Arcturus, let's close the provisional audit process for now. We need to show momentum for the investors. I'm accepting the risk." A thumbs-up emoji followed. It was the corporate equivalent of a pat on the head and a quiet order to look the other way. I didn't look away. I started digging. The Arcturus Ledger website was a masterpiece of corporate buzzword salad. Synergy, blockchain, paradigm-shifting solutions, with no substance, no client list, no case studies, no executive bios, just stock photos of smiling, diverse people in bright, airy offices. I ran a domain registration check. https google.com/search QQO Arcturus Ledger. Com had been registered 6 weeks prior. The address listed was a generic corporate services suite at 113B Harborview Drive. The name of the building rang a faint bell. I pulled up Cassidy's social media and scrolled back through her endless stream of wedding planning posts. There it was, a photo of her signing a contract, captioned, "Booked the most amazing photo studio for our engagement shoot. Can't wait. Harborview Arts Lofts." The address was 113B Harborview Drive. It could be a coincidence. Graybridge was a big city, but the tech and art scenes often overlapped in trendy, repurposed industrial buildings. Still, it was a thread, and my job was to pull on threads. The engagement photos appeared online a week later. They were professionally done, bathed in a soft, romantic light, but they were strange. In every shot, the groom's face was obscured. In one, he was turned away, looking out a window. In another, he was kissing Cassidy, but the angle was from behind his head, showing only her ecstatic face. In a close-up of their hands, his face was cropped out just above the chin. The captions all gushed about her mysterious, private fiancé. "He hates the camera, but I love him," she wrote. Privacy was one thing. This felt like a deliberate erasure. This was a man who did not want his picture taken. That night, my adoptive mother called. She'd been our mother since I was 10 and Cassidy was 8. A kind woman who believed that a cup of tea and a positive attitude could solve most of the world's problems. "Cassidy told me you two had a little tiff about the wedding." "Honey," she began, her voice gentle. "She disinvited me, Mom." "Oh, I know. But you know how she gets. She's under a lot of stress. This Grant fellow sounds wonderful, and she just wants everything to be perfect. Don't go making a fuss. Rowan, just let her have her moment. Don't ruin the party." Don't ruin the party. It was the unofficial motto of my childhood. A phrase deployed any time my inconvenient questions or quiet observations threatened to disrupt the carefully curated facade of our happy family. But my career had taught me one unshakable truth. Every secret, Every carefully hidden detail eventually leaves an invoice, and someone always has to pay it. "I won't," I lied, the words tasting like ash. The next morning, I used my directorial authority to schedule a mandatory vendor review with the primary contact for Arcturus Ledger. An automated reply set a meeting for the following Tuesday. On Monday afternoon, I received a cancellation notice. Rescheduling due to an unforeseen conflict. I set a new time for Thursday. On Wednesday, it was canceled again. Regretfully, our representative has a last-minute travel obligation. I scheduled a third meeting, this time for Friday, and CC'd the CFO's office. An hour before the meeting, an email arrived, not from the representative, but from Julian Croft's executive assistant. "Mr. Croft has requested we postpone this engagement to allow the Arcturus team to focus on the upcoming investor demo. He will circle back with you at a more appropriate time." I was being stonewalled, professionally and personally. Doors were being shut in my face. It was coordinated. It was deliberate. The feeling was no longer one of mere suspicion. It was a cold certainty. Settling deep in my bones, I was being managed, handled, and boxed out from a situation that involved my company's money and my sister's future. It felt as though someone was writing a script for a play where I was a key character. But I was the only one in the room who hadn't been given the lines, and I was being pushed off the stage before the first act had even truly begun. Being told to stand down is a corporate suggestion. In my world, it's an invitation. If the front door is locked, I find a fire escape. With the official channels blocked by the CFO, I went through the basement, every contract executed at Hearthaven, regardless of its approval status, leaves a digital footprint in the archival servers. It's a compliance failsafe I designed myself. It took me less than 10 minutes of navigating my own back doors to have the full Arcturus Ledger Master Services Agreement open on my encrypted personal laptop. I bypassed the boilerplate and went straight to the payment schedule in Appendix B. My eyes scanned the columns of figures, my mind a cold calculator. And then I saw it, a line item buried between software licensing and support retainers. Accelerated integration fee. It was a 7-figure sum, an audacious charge for what was essentially priority service. There was no record of a competitive bid, no justification for the cost, no waiver from procurement. It was a ghost fee, slipped in under the cover of executive urgency. But it wasn't the lack of process that made my blood run cold. It was the amount, to the dollar. It matched the projected discretionary bonus pool for the entire Strategic Partnerships division for the fiscal quarter. This wasn't a fee. It was a payout. It was theft, laundered through a vendor contract. The execution of the contract required 3 digital signatures: the vendor, the sponsoring department head, and a final sign-off from internal controls to verify procedural compliance. Cassidy's signature was there. Her boss's was there. And below them, clear as day, was the cryptographic timestamp and authentication seal for Rowan Vale. Except I had never seen this document before in my life. I stared at my own name, my own digital key, used to authorize a fraudulent payment. It was a violation, a professional home invasion. Someone had stolen my keys and used them to burn down the house. I pulled the logs for the signature's execution. The system recorded the IP address, the device signature, the exact moment of authentication. The signature bearing my name was executed 3 weeks ago at 11:47 p.m. The access point wasn't a Hearthaven corporate network. It was a commercial VPN service, its server physically located at a high-end luxury hotel on the city's waterfront, the Halcyon Key. The same hotel where Cassidy had her engagement photo shoot, the same hotel whose address was a stone's throw from the shell company that registered the Arcturus domain. Coincidences were piling up, forming a pattern as clear and damning as a fingerprint on glass. Now I had the what, the when, and the where. I needed the how. How did they get my credentials? My primary system access is locked down with multi-factor authentication that would require my physical presence. It had to be something else, something simpler. I started tracing the document's metadata, looking at the draft versions. The final version was clean, but a draft from a week prior had been shared via a link to a cloud folder. Access logs for that folder showed a download from an authorized account. Arvail Personal, my secondary, non-critical email account. I rarely used it for work, but I remembered linking it to one thing: the Hearthaven Annual Charity Drive. 3 months ago, Cassidy had volunteered to assist with the communications campaign. She'd sent out a company-wide blast email with a link to a third-party donation portal, encouraging everyone to sign up. "Let's show the community our heart," the email had chirped, to seem like a team player. I'd registered using my secondary email. Cassidy, in her role as communications support, would have had access to the registrant list, to the email addresses. A spearphishing attack, masked as a charity initiative and launched from the inside, would have been trivially easy for someone with her access. She hadn't just disinvited me from her wedding, she had used a canned food drive as a Trojan horse to steal my identity. The next day felt surreal. The CTO, a man perpetually fueled by caffeine and impatience, caught me by the coffee machine. "Rowan, that Arcturus platform is slick. We've got the investor demo next week, and it needs to be flawless. Let's make sure all the compliance boxes are green lit, okay? We need to push this fast." He was gone before I could answer. A moment later, a message from CFO Julian Croft hit my screen. It was just another thumbs-up emoji in response to a status update from partnerships. An emoji. The man was approving a multi-million-dollar fraud with a cartoon hand gesture. I went back to my desk and created a new, hyper-secure digital vault on an isolated server. It was triple encrypted, air-gapped from the main network, and accessible only by me. I named the root folder Terrace. Into it, I began to upload everything: the contract, the server logs, the screenshots of Cassidy's social media posts, the charity drive emails, the network traces that linked the VPN to Halcyon Key. I set up a dead man's switch, a script that would email the entire contents of the folder to the board of directors and the SEC if I didn't log in every 12 hours. A silent countdown clock began to run in the corner of my mind. I scheduled a perfunctory meeting with our head of legal, a man whose primary function was to translate risk into billable hours. I presented a heavily redacted, hypothetical version of the situation. "What would be the protocol?" I asked. "For a potential signature irregularity on a fast-tracked vendor contract sponsored at the executive level." He steepled his fingers, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. "In a delicate situation like that, Rowan," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "The goal is always containment. We wouldn't want to disrupt a key strategic initiative over a minor procedural discrepancy. The best advice would be to document the anomaly in a low-level file and quietly close the inquiry." He was telling me to bury it, which meant they already knew, or at the very least, they suspected, and had made a calculated decision to let it slide. His advice was a confirmation. I was on my own. Closing the inquiry quietly meant I had to open it wide. That night, I dove into the corporate ownership of Arcturus Ledger. It was, as I suspected, a shell, registered in Delaware. Its ownership was listed as another LLC, which was in turn owned by a holding company in Wyoming. I spent hours peeling back the layers of the corporate onion, cross-referencing public records and paying for access to specialized databases. Finally, I found the bottom. The ultimate parent entity, the one that held all the others, was a venture capital firm named North Alder Ventures. It had almost no public profile, but it had one legal document on file with the state of Graybridge, a guarantor agreement for its office lease. There was one signatory, one person legally vouching for the entire shadowy enterprise. The name on the document was Grant Riven. The name hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't a name I had expected to see again outside of a university alumni newsletter. I immediately deleted. Grant Riven. He was a senior when I was a sophomore in college. Charming in a way that always seemed predatory. He was known for talking his way into, and out of, anything. I remembered one specific night, a party before midterms. He'd lost his student ID and sweet-talked me into letting him borrow mine to get into a restricted computer science lab to finish a project. "Just for an hour, Rowan. I swear, you're a lifesaver." The next morning, Campus security was investigating a security breach. Someone had used my ID to access the lab and had attempted to download proprietary research data. Grant was suspended for a semester. I was cleared, but the suspicion lingered. It was the first time my name had been used without my permission. It seemed he had made a career of it. My fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for him. I searched social media, professional networks, news articles, nothing. There were no recent photos of a Grant Riven who fit the age profile, no LinkedIn, no Facebook, no triumphant posts about his new venture. It was as if he didn't exist in the modern world. The man was a ghost. Then I remembered the engagement photos. I pulled them up again, zooming in on the carefully cropped and obscured images of the man holding my sister. His face was always hidden, but in one shot, a close-up of their intertwined hands. His left hand was clearly visible. A simple modern wedding band was on his ring finger. The hand of Grant Riven, the architect of the fraud, the man who had stolen my name again, was about to marry my sister, and I had no idea what he looked like. The wall between my professional and personal life, once a sturdy partition, had become a pane of glass. I could see the collision coming. I decided to give the wall one last push. I sent Cassidy a simple text, devoid of accusation or emotion, a single line of inquiry into the void she had created between us. "I need to meet him. 5 minutes." The reply was almost instantaneous, a digital slap. No. Just that. No explanation, no excuse, a period at the end of it, hard and final as a slammed door. She was no longer hiding him. She was guarding him. She was guarding the secret. That single word confirmed everything. It was the final piece of denial I needed before I could proceed. 2 days later, the official, updated wedding invitation arrived in my inbox. It seemed my disinvitation had been rescinded, replaced by a silent, formal summons. I wasn't being invited as a sister. I was being monitored as a threat. I opened the email. The design was elegant, all cream and gold filigree. My eyes went straight to the venue details. The location had been changed from the quaint vineyard they had originally booked. The new venue was the Halcyon Key. They weren't just using the hotel's network to commit their crime. They were turning the scene of the crime into their stage. It was an act of supreme arrogance, a belief that they were so thoroughly insulated from consequence that they could celebrate their victory on the very ground where it was won. That evening, I came home to find a plain, brown padded envelope tucked under my apartment door. No stamp, no return address. It had been hand-delivered. My heart rate quickened, a cold, steady drum against my ribs. Inside, there was no note, just a single, cheap, black plastic USB drive. I took it to my personal computer, the one I used for off-the-grid research, and plugged it in. The drive contained a single video file, named simply R. I clicked play. It was a screen recording, crisp and clear. It showed the Hearthaven Capital vendor portal, the Arcturus contract open on the screen. I watched as a cursor, moving with practiced speed, navigated to the signature field. It selected my name from the drop-down menu. It clicked the box to authenticate. And then, for a fraction of a second, before the confirmation window popped up, the screen went dark as the software processed the cryptographic key. In that moment of blackness, the monitor became a mirror. It reflected a figure, a silhouette against the dim light of a room behind them. I couldn't see a face, only the vague shape of a head and shoulders. But the angle of the recording captured the hand on the mouse, the arm resting on the desk, and on the inside of the wrist, reflected in the dark glass of the monitor, was a scar. It was a pale, silvery mark against the skin, thin and precise, a perfect crescent moon. The air left my lungs. The room felt suddenly cold, the memory hitting me with the force of a physical impact. College, a loud, crowded party in a cramped off-campus house, the sound of shattering glass. Grant Riven, laughing too loudly, had slammed his fist on a table, sending a beer glass to the floor. Later, in the relative quiet of the kitchen, he'd stumbled, his hand landing squarely in the pile of broken shards. He was drunk and bleeding, trying to pull a jagged piece from his wrist. I was the sober one, the responsible one. I was the one who picked the other shards of glass from his skin with tweezers from my first aid kit. I was the one who cleaned the wound and taped a butterfly bandage over the deep, curved gash. The scar I was looking at now, glowing on my laptop screen, was a map of a wound I had personally dressed over a decade ago. The anonymous sender had just handed me the weapon. They had linked the digital ghost to a physical body. The next morning, I went on the offensive. I needed to know how deep the rot went, how active the conspiracy was. I created a phantom invoice in our system. It was from a dormant, pre-approved vendor. For a small, plausible amount. Consulting services for a project that had been recently closed. It was a ghost, a piece of bait. But I embedded a digital watermark in the invoice number itself. A tracker that would ping my secure server the moment the invoice was accessed and processed. I filed it, and I waited. The system was designed for a 3 to 5 day processing period for non-urgent payments. 41 minutes later, my server pinged. The invoice had been received, approved, and scheduled for payment. Someone wasn't just breaking the rules. They had built their own private, high-speed lane through the heart of our financial controls. They were deep inside the machine, turning its gears to their own rhythm. This required more than a stolen signature. This required an accomplice with the highest level of administrative access, someone who could approve payments and silence the automated flags my system was designed to raise. The realization settled, cold and heavy. This wasn't just Grant and Cassidy. This was a trinity. Someone held the keys to both doors, the corporate vault and the family home. The person who had the power to make a 7-figure fraud disappear and the authority to tell me to stand down, Julian Croft, the CFO. I sent a single, polite email to his executive assistant, requesting a brief, informal chat with Julian. My schedule is open. She booked me for the following evening. The location he chose was his usual spot for quiet, off-the-record conversations, a rooftop bar at the Halcyon Quay. The bar was named Terrace. He had no idea he was walking into a cage I had named after him. He arrived 15 minutes late, a deliberate assertion of his own importance. The wind whipped across the rooftop, tugging at his perfectly tailored suit jacket. He ordered a ridiculously expensive scotch and gestured for me to take a seat. "Rowan," he began, his voice smooth and condescending, the tone of a man placating a difficult child. "I'm glad you reached out. There's been some tension lately. I want you to know that your diligence is appreciated. It truly is. You're one of our best assets." I said nothing, letting him spin his web. "But you have to understand," he continued, leaning forward, "that in a business moving at our speed, sometimes we need to be flexible. We need to be agile. We can't let rigid old-world bureaucracy stifle innovation. Arcturus is a game changer. Marcus is thrilled. The board is thrilled. Sometimes, you just have to trust the process, even if it looks a little different." He sat back, satisfied with his speech, taking a slow sip of his scotch. He believed he was handling me. He believed this was over. I smiled, a thin, cold curve of my lips. "I appreciate the lesson on flexibility. Julian." I reached into my bag and pulled out my tablet and the small, black USB drive. I placed the drive on the polished marble table between us. It was a tiny, insignificant object holding a cataclysm. "But my job isn't flexibility," I said, my voice quiet but carrying over the wind. "It's integrity." I plugged the USB into the tablet and turned the screen toward him. I didn't press play. I just opened the file, so the thumbnail was visible. It was a still frame of the video, frozen on the moment the screen went black. The image was dark, but the reflection was perfectly clear. Julian Croft leaned forward, his eyes narrowing to see the screen. He saw the reflected silhouette. He saw the arm on the desk. He saw the wrist. And he saw the pale, silvery scar, glowing in the manufactured twilight of the rooftop bar like a thumbprint left by a careless ghost. His carefully constructed composure shattered, his face slackening into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The game was up, and he knew it. Julian Croft's panic was a satisfying appetizer. But it wasn't the meal. A cornered executive is dangerous. But the evidence I had was circumstantial, a reflection on a screen. To bring down the entire structure, I needed the foundation. I needed the paper trail that connected the digital ghost, Grant Riven, to the physical world. The next morning, I submitted a request for a personal day. The reason I gave was a lie wrapped in a truth, attending to pre-wedding matters for my sister. My destination was not a spa or a salon. It was the Graybridge Municipal Records Building, a brutalist concrete structure downtown that smelled of archival dust and decaying paper. Here, the city's commercial life was laid bare in millions of filings, a library of ambition and failure. I was looking for the birth certificate of North Alder Ventures. It took the clerk, a woman with glasses on a chain and a profound lack of curiosity, 20 minutes to retrieve the file from the deep archives. She handed me a thin manila folder, its corners softened with age. Inside, the documents were crisp and formal, articles of incorporation, statements of intent. I flipped to the final page, the signatory page for the authorized filer. My breath caught. The person who had physically walked into this building and filed the paperwork to create the shell company that owned Arcturus Ledger was listed, in neat block letters, as C. Vale, and the signature beside it was my sister's familiar looping script. It was a bold, foolish move, born of either arrogance or desperation. She had used her own name. She had left a piece of herself embedded in the very bedrock of their fraud. I photographed every page with my phone, the quiet clicks of the shutter sounding like gunshots in the silent room. As the clerk took the file back, I made one more request. I'm also looking for any courier or shipping manifests associated with this LLC's file number from the past 6 months. She sighed, a gust of weary patience, but typed the query into her ancient terminal. After a moment, the printer whirred to life, spitting out a single sheet. It was a receipt from a local courier service for a box of legal documents sent from a downtown print shop to the registered address for North Alder Ventures. The sender's signature was a quick, sharp scrawl, CV, and in the recipient field, the name was printed clearly, G. Riven. Cassidy hadn't just filed the paperwork, she was actively managing the logistics of the phantom. She was the stage manager for her own fiancé's disappearance. The most valuable piece of information was on the filing document itself. A contact phone number, required for the application. It was a local number. I walked out of the records building into the thin afternoon sunlight and stood on the steps, the noise of the city washing over me. I took a deep breath, and I called the number. It rang twice, then went to a generic, automated voicemail. The person you have called is unavailable. Please leave a message. No name, no identity, a burner phone, a ghost line. I went back to the office. The open plan space was buzzing with its usual low hum of productivity. I saw Julie and Croft walking down the main corridor, deep in conversation with our head of legal. They were laughing about something. As they passed my department's glass wall, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number again. I watched Julian through the glass. He continued walking, laughing, showing no reaction, but as he passed, I heard it, a faint, muffled, electronic buzzing from the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He didn't even break stride. He simply reached into his pocket and, with one smooth, practiced movement, silenced the call. He owned the ghost's phone. He was the man on the other end of the line. The triangle was complete. Cassidy was the hands, the one running the errands and leaving her signature on the paper trail. Grant was the face, or the lack of one, the legal entity, the name on the lease, and Julian was the power, the man inside Hearthaven who could turn the keys, approve the payments, and silence any alarms. They were 3 points of a single, corrupt shape. The only question was which side to break first to make the whole thing collapse. The answer came from an automated security alert that evening. It was a low-priority flag, one most people would ignore. The system had detected a duplicate use of my employee access card within a 30-second window at 2 different locations, the main turnstile and the executive parking garage elevator. It was a telltale sign of a cloned card. Someone had copied my credentials. They weren't just using my digital signature. They had created a physical ghost of me to move through the building. This was their mistake. It gave me an opening, a legal and ethical justification for my next move. The next morning, I went to my lab. I took my own official ID badge and carefully, surgically, affixed a tiny, GPS-enabled RFID tracker to the back, hidden within the layers of plastic. It was a legal gray area, but my argument was solid. I wasn't tracking a person. I was tracking corporate property, my own security credentials, that I had reason to believe had been compromised and duplicated. I was tracking the clone. For 2 days, my digital doppelganger was silent. My real card and the tracker stayed with me. Then, on Friday afternoon, I got the alert. My cloned card had just been used to access the 22nd floor, the executive suites. Minutes later, it left the building and began to move across the city. I watched on my tablet as the small blue dot traced a path directly from Hearthaven Capital to the front entrance of the Halcyon Key. It was time to get my sister in a room with no exits. I sent her a text, injecting as much artificial warmth as I could. "Hey, Cass, I know things have been weird, but I'd still love to be there for you. Can we please go try on bridesmaid dresses tomorrow? My treat." She was cornered by the sudden offer of an olive branch. To refuse would be an admission of guilt. Her reply came a few minutes later. "Okay, l'étoile bridal at noon." The boutique was a temple of white silk and feigned emotion. We were ushered into a private viewing suite, a room of plush gray carpet, champagne flutes, and mirrors on every wall, reflecting us from every angle. There was nowhere to hide. Cassidy stood on the small pedestal as the attendant clipped her into a dress that cost more than my first car. She looked beautiful and fragile, a doll made of lace and lies. I sat on the velvet settee, playing the part of the admiring older sister. As she was turning, admiring her own reflection, her phone, which she'd left on the table beside me, lit up. A new text message had arrived. The screen showed the sender's name, G. Riven. The message was short and brutal in its clarity. "Transfer is done. Make sure you change the routing account before the demo. Julian is getting nervous." I felt the last vestiges of sisterly affection turn to ice. I looked up from the phone and met her eyes in the mirror. She was watching me, her face pale. Having seen me read the screen, the attendant, oblivious, continued to fuss with the hem of the dress. The silence in the room was sterile, broken only by the rustle of fabric. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I asked the question that had been sitting between us for weeks, a cold, hard stone in my throat. "Why, Cassidy? Why wouldn't you let me meet him?" She turned from the mirror to face me directly. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a flash of something harder, a bitter, long-simmering resentment. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and venomous. "Because you ruin things, Rowan," she said. "You always have. You ask too many questions. You look for problems. You make everything a problem." She said it as if it were my fault, as if my integrity was an illness that threatened to infect her perfect criminal world. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't just an obstacle to be avoided. I was the problem to be solved. And the only solution she and her partners could envision was to remove me from the equation entirely. Her answer wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. The ballroom at the Hearthaven Conference Center was packed. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and self-congratulation. On a massive stage, under theatrical lighting, the Arcturus Ledger logo pulsed with a soft, confident blue. This was the main event of Investor Day, the unveiling of the technology that was supposed to redefine the company. I stood at the back of the room, a ghost at the feast. My presence required, but my opinion clearly not desired. The demo was slick, a masterclass in corporate theater, a charismatic tech presenter from Arcturus, a man with a sharp suit and a wireless headset, walked the audience through a series of dazzling graphics. He spoke of frictionless reconciliation and immutable ledgers, He claimed their platform could cross-reference and validate transactions between disparate financial systems in real time, a holy grail of fintech. The investors, a collection of stony-faced men and women who controlled billions, were nodding. Even our own executive team looked mesmerized. Finally, the presenter turned to our CEO. And now, to speak to the rigorous internal validation this platform has undergone, I'd like to invite to the stage Hearthaven's own CEO, Marcus Thorne. Marcus, radiating confidence, strode to the center of the stage. He delivered a glowing endorsement, praising the agility of the partnerships team and the vision of the CFO. Then, he went off script. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. "I see our Director of Internal Controls, Rowan Vale, in the back," he announced, his voice booming through the speakers. A spotlight swung and found me, pinning me in its glare. "Rowan is our guardian, the one who makes sure we do everything by the book. Why don't you come up, Rowan, and say a few words? Reassure our guests that Arcturus has our full compliance seal of approval." It was a power play, meant to publicly corner me, to force me to either endorse the fraud or look like a difficult, uncooperative subordinate in front of the people who held the company's fate in their hands. Julian Croft, sitting in the front row, gave me a small, smug smile. He thought he had won. He didn't realize he had just handed me the microphone. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking a steady, deliberate rhythm on the polished floor. The room was silent, all eyes on me. I took the proffered microphone from Marcus, my hand steady. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice cool and even. "I'd be happy to." I walked to the lectern and plugged my personal thumb drive into the presentation laptop. The tech presenter started to move toward me, a look of protest on his face, but I gave him a look that stopped him cold. On the massive screen behind me, the slick Arcturus logo was replaced by my own presentation. It was a single, stark white slide. In the center, in bold, black, sans serif font, were 2 words: Integrity Test. A low chuckle rippled through the audience. They thought I was making a joke, a dry little piece of corporate humor. I saw Julian whisper something to the head of legal, a dismissive smirk on his face. "The core promise of Arcturus Ledger," I began, my voice amplified, filling every corner of the room, "is its ability to instantly validate the authenticity of any financial document against a complex, multi-source ledger, a true digital fingerprint. So, let's test it." On the lectern's monitor, I opened a simple command line interface that was projected onto the main screen. I am now going to generate a random alphanumeric string. This string does not exist in any Hearthaven system. It is not an invoice number, a transaction ID, or a purchase order. It is cryptographic nonsense, born 1 second ago. I hit enter. A string of 64 characters filled the screen, F4B8E1C9. "I have embedded a simple digital watermark into this string," I explained, my fingers moving quickly. "Now, I am submitting this completely fabricated document ID to the Arcturus system for real-time validation." I pasted the string into a field on the live demo platform and clicked Validate. The system was supposed to check this against millions of records and return an error. It was supposed to tell me the document didn't exist. Instead, less than a second later, a large green checkmark appeared on the screen, accompanied by the words, "Documentation valid, certified." The polite chuckles died. A confused murmur spread through the room. The investors were no longer nodding. They were frowning, leaning forward in their seats. They understood the implication. A system that validates nonsense is not a system at all. It's a magic trick. "Impressive speed," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "Now, for compliance purposes, let's review the audit log for that validation." I clicked a button on the screen labeled Source Log. A new window popped up, displaying the metadata for the transaction I had just performed. It showed the source of the validation request. IP address 10.1.1.24, Hearthaven Internal Network. User ID RVAL. The room went completely, utterly silent. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. My own user ID had been used to certify a fake document in a system I had never touched. The tech presenter, his face ashen, began speaking into his headset. "We seem to be having a technical glitch. Let's pause the presentation." The MC's voice from the back of the room cut in. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break." "No, we're not," I said clearly into my microphone. It remained live. I had spoken to the AV team before the demo, invoking a non-negotiable compliance protocol for whistleblower presentations. My mic could not be cut. With the room's captive attention, I clicked to the next slide. It was the image from the anonymous USB drive, the dark screen, the reflection of the silhouette, and the pale crescent moon scar on the wrist, now blown up to 10 feet tall. It hung in the air like a piece of damning modern art. "This screen recording," I said, my voice ringing with cold fury, "shows the moment my digital signature was forged on the Arcturus contract. My name was used. But this is the hand that did it. So I have a simple question for the Hearthaven executive team and our partners at Arcturus Ledger. Who is the person behind my signature?" The side door of the ballroom burst open. Julian Croft strode in, flanked by 2 lawyers from our legal department. His face was a thunderous mask of rage. He was marching toward the stage, intending to physically stop me, to shut down the presentation and drag me out of the room. He thought this was still a corporate dispute. I was about to elevate it. I held up a hand, not to him, but to the room at large. "Just so we're all clear," I announced, my voice unwavering. "If this presentation is shut down, my very next phone call will be to Hearthaven's Independent Audit Committee Chair, with a formal request to contact the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. We can handle this internally as a case of massive fraud, or we can handle it externally as a federal crime. The choice is yours." The word FinCEN landed in the room like a bomb. It was the nuclear option. The investors' faces went from confused to horrified. This was no longer a bad investment. It was potential criminal exposure. Julian stopped dead in his tracks. The lawyers froze behind him. All eyes turned to one man, Marcus Thorne, the CEO, who was still standing on the stage, paralyzed. His face white as a sheet. The company he ran was imploding, live, in front of the very people he had been trying to impress. He was trapped. Silencing me now would be an admission of guilt. Letting me continue would be a public execution. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, terrible understanding. He had been played, and I was the only one who could clean it up. The silence stretched for a full 10 seconds, an eternity of pure tension. Finally, he swallowed hard, a pained, audible gulp. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and then he spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper that the microphone picked up with perfect clarity. "Continue." I looked out over the front rows of the audience, past the stunned faces of the executives and investors, and I saw her, Cassidy. She was sitting in a guest chair near the aisle. She had been watching the entire thing, her face a canvas of disbelief and terror. As my eyes met hers, the defiance she had shown me in the bridal shop crumbled. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted toward Julian, then back to the giant image of the scarred wrist on the screen. The trap had been sprung, and she was in it. She held my gaze for a fraction of a second longer, and then her face fell, her eyes dropping to the floor in a silent, final admission of defeat. The demolition of my sister's life was not something I wanted to witness in a boardroom. It required a more personal setting. That evening, I sent a single, untraceable email to the burner phone number, the one that had buzzed in Julian Croft's pocket. There was no subject line, no text in the body. Just one attachment, the high-resolution, time-stamped photograph of the crescent moon scar on the wrist, glowing in the reflection of the monitor. I followed it with a text message containing 2 words. Terrace, 9 p.m. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. I chose the same table where I had met Julian, a small island of polished stone in the biting wind that swept across the rooftop. The lights of Greybridge glittered below. A silent, indifferent audience. I ordered a club soda and waited. I was expecting Grant Riven, the college memory made flesh, or perhaps Julian Croft, coming to negotiate the terms of his surrender. At 9:05, a figure emerged from the stairwell door. The silhouette was too slight to be a man. It was a woman, wrapped in a stark white trench coat, her hair a pale blonde flag in the wind. She walked toward me, her steps hesitant but deliberate. It was Cassidy. She sat down opposite me, clutching her coat closed at the neck. Her face was pale, stripped of makeup, her eyes wide and haunted. She looked less like a bride-to-be and more like a ghost who had lost her way. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice flat, betraying no surprise. Cassidy said nothing. She simply stared at me, her gaze a mixture of fear and a strange, unnerving resolve. Then, with a slow, theatrical deliberation, she unbuttoned the cuff of her right sleeve. She pushed the white fabric up her forearm and laid her wrist flat on the cold marble table, directly under the dim glow of the overhead heater. There it was, not a similar mark, not a coincidence. It was the scar, the identical, silvery, crescent moon scar, a pale, permanent smile etched into her skin. My mind reeled, the memory I had held for over a decade fracturing and reforming into a new, terrible shape. The party, the broken glass, the blood. I had been so focused on Grant, the charismatic center of the chaos, that I had misremembered the crucial detail. "The glass," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the wind. "I was the one who broke it. I squeezed it in my hand because you had just gotten that academic scholarship, and Mom wouldn't stop talking about it at dinner. I was angry." She finally looked me in the eye. "Grant was just the one who taught me how to use a name as an excuse. He took the blame because he didn't care. He taught me that a name, a story, is a place to hide." The truth landed with a sickening thud. Grant Riven wasn't a man. He was a myth, a construct, a name on a legal document, a phantom fiancé, a shell identity they could all wear when it suited them. "So you and Julian," I started, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. "There is no Grant Riven," she confirmed, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "There's just a name on a piece of paper. Sometimes Julian was Grant when we needed to sign a lease. Sometimes I was Grant when I needed to courier a package. We were both him." She took a ragged breath. "Julian showed me the back doors in the system, how to bypass procurement, how to push a payment through. He told me if I could get a sample of your signature, just a clean digital copy, he could replicate the key, the charity drive. That was my idea." The confession was cold, methodical. She laid out the entire conspiracy as if she were describing a business plan, the calculated theft of my identity, the cynical exploitation of a charity, the systematic dismantling of the controls I had spent my career building. There was no remorse in her voice, only the flat, tired tone of someone who has been caught. "Why?" I asked. The question was a single, hard knot in my chest. "Why would you do all of this, Cassidy?" For the first time, her composure cracked. A single tear traced a path down her pale cheek, glittering in the low light. She gave a short, bitter laugh that the wind stole and threw out into the night. "Why?" she repeated, her voice thick with a lifetime of resentment. "Because my entire life has been lived in the shadow you cast. Rowan, you were the smart one, the brilliant one, the one who got the scholarships, the one who built a career, the one Mom was always so proud of. I was just the other one, the pretty one, the social one, the one who was supposed to marry well." Her eyes blazed with a sudden, raw hatred. "I was sick of it. I was sick of being your footnote. This was supposed to be mine. Grant, the wedding, the money. It was all supposed to be mine. Something you had no part in. Something that would finally make me more than just your little sister." She was crying freely now, but the tears didn't soften her. They were tears of rage, not regret. She had built this entire, elaborate fraud not just for the money, but as an act of pathetic, desperate rebellion. I listened to it all, my face a mask of stone. I let her finish. let the last of her venomous justifications hang in the cold night air. When she was done, sobbing quietly into her hands, I did not offer a word of comfort. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I slid it across the table. "This," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs, "is an affidavit. It's a full confession, detailing every step of the fraud, every person involved, every dollar that was stolen. And this," I added, placing a second, slimmer document on top of it, "is a proffer agreement from an independent counsel I've already retained on behalf of the board's audit committee. It states that in exchange for your full and immediate cooperation, they will recommend to the U.S. Attorney's Office that you be treated as a cooperating witness, not a target." She looked up, her tear-streaked face a mess of confusion and dawning horror. She stared at the documents as if they were snakes. "I'm offering you a choice, Cassidy," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You can sign that confession, tell them everything you told me, and you will likely avoid prison, or you can refuse, and I will hand over the entire contents of the Terrace file to the board and the SEC tomorrow morning, and you will be charged with conspiracy, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You will spend the best years of your life in a federal facility." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. "So you need to choose, right now. Will it be the white rose on a bridal gown, or the orange jumpsuit of a federal inmate?" She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, then her eyes drifted past me, out to the vast, glittering expanse of the city below. The wind whipped her hair across her face, catching the tears on her cheeks. She was on a precipice, 1,000 feet in the air, and I had just pushed her to the edge. After a long, silent moment, she lowered her gaze back to the papers on the table. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'll sign it," she whispered, her voice broken. "I'll talk." Then she looked up at me, a final, desperate plea in her eyes. "But you have to promise me one thing. You can't ruin my wedding." I looked at my sister, the architect of my professional ruin, a woman who had tried to build her dream life on the ashes of my reputation, and I delivered the final, inescapable truth. "You already did." The party was a masterpiece of curated deception. The grand ballroom of the Halcyon Key had been transformed into a forest of golden light and white flowers. String lights, the color of warm honey, were draped from the ceiling, casting a soft, forgiving glow on the laughing, champagne-sipping guests. The air hummed with soft jazz and expensive perfume. It was a scene from a magazine, a perfect picture of wealth and happiness, and every detail was a lie. I stood near the back, a silent observer in a simple black dress, a stark column of shadow in a room of glittering pastels. I had given Cassidy the signed confession back on the rooftop. I had also given her a choice. Proceed with this party as planned, and I would execute the final phase of my plan in public, or cancel it, come to the board with me in the morning, and handle this with the quiet, brutal efficiency of a corporate execution. She had chosen the performance. She had chosen to believe, right until the very end, that she could somehow control the narrative. A hush fell over the room as the master of ceremonies, a man with a dazzling smile and an empty voice, stepped up to a small, spotlit stage. "Friends, family, colleagues, tonight, we are here to celebrate a truly special couple, a woman we all know and admire for her vibrant energy, Hearthaven's own Cassidy Vale." A wave of polite, enthusiastic applause. Cassidy emerged from a side door, a vision in a flowing, cream-colored dress. She was beautiful, ethereal, and utterly terrified. I could see the fine tremor in her hands from across the room. She was smiling, but it was a brittle, fragile thing, a mask of glass that was moments away from shattering. She walked to the center of the stage, a sacrifice moving toward the altar. "And now," the MC boomed, his voice dripping with manufactured excitement, "the moment we've all been waiting for. For months, he has been a man of mystery, a romantic enigma. But tonight, for the first time, we are thrilled to introduce you to the man who has captured Cassidy's heart. Ladies and gentlemen, Please welcome Mr. Grant Riven." The jazz combo played a triumphant fanfare. The doors opened. A man walked out. He was tall and wore an impeccably tailored suit, but something was horribly, farcically wrong. He was wearing a wig, a ludicrously thick, dark brown toupee that sat on his head like a sleeping animal. His face was caked in a thick layer of foundation, a desperate attempt to cover the familiar lines and contours of a man 2 decades his senior. But the makeup couldn't hide the distinctive shape of his jaw, the arrogant set of his mouth, or the panic in his eyes. And it did a poor job of concealing the pale, crescent-shaped scar on his wrist, which he tried, and failed, to keep hidden with the cuff of his shirt. It was Julian Croft, the CFO of Hearthaven Capital, masquerading as a young, vibrant entrepreneur, a pathetic charlatan in a bad disguise. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the guests who knew him, a sound of cognitive dissonance as they tried to reconcile the man they saw with the myth they had been sold. He walked to Cassidy's side, took her trembling hand, and raised it in a gesture of triumph. The applause was scattered, uncertain. They stood together under the warm lights, the picture of a perfect lie. I let the awkward moment hang in the air for a full 10 seconds. Then, I raised my hand. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice cutting through the confused whispers. "If I may, I'd like to propose a toast." The MC, desperate for a return to the script, seized the opportunity. "Of course, a few words from the maid of honor and the bride's sister. Rowan Vale." I walked calmly to the stage, taking the microphone from his hand. I turned to face the couple. Julian's eyes were boring into me, filled with a silent, murderous rage. Cassidy wouldn't look at me at all. She was staring at a fixed point on the floor, her entire body rigid with dread. "To Cassidy and Grant," I began, my voice smooth and clear. "We are all here tonight to celebrate their union, a partnership built on a foundation of shared values." I paused, letting the words land. "And in that spirit, I have a small presentation, a tribute to the incredible journey that brought them together." I nodded to the AV technician at the back of the room, who I had spoken to an hour earlier, providing him with a new file and a very specific set of instructions. The large screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a tasteful monogram of the couple's initials, flickered to life. But it wasn't a slideshow of happy memories. It was a stark, corporate flowchart, the kind I would present in a fraud investigation audit. Clean, sharp boxes were connected by bold, black arrows. The diagram was brutally simple, utterly damning. The first box on the left read, "Hearthaven Capital, Bonus Pool Fund." An arrow led from it to a second box. "Arcturus Ledger, Accelerated Integration Fee." From there, another arrow pointed to a third box. "North Alder Ventures, Operating Account." And from that box, a final, damning arrow pointed to a single, rectangular box on the far right. Inside it was a bank account number, and beneath it, a name. Cassidy Vale. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. It was a physical sound, a sudden intake of air, as if the room itself was in shock. The jazz music, which had been playing softly, faltered and then stopped completely. The only sound was the low hum of the projector and the frantic, shallow breaths of my sister. I turned to face her, the microphone held close to my lips. Julian was staring at the screen, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and horror, the heavy makeup on his face seeming to melt under the hot stage lights. "Congratulations, little sister," I said, my voice quiet but amplified to fill every corner of the silent, cavernous room. "For the first time in this entire venture, you finally signed something with your own name." Cassidy made a small, choking sound. She looked from the screen to Julian, her eyes wide with panic and accusation. He took a half step back from her, as if she were contagious, his hand coming up to loosen his collar. The champagne flute he was holding slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered on the stage, the sound as sharp and final as a gunshot. At that exact moment, the grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 2 men and a woman entered. They were not guests, They wore dark, conservative suits and carried leather briefcases. Their faces were impassive, professional. They were the independent counsel and 2 forensic auditors from the firm I had retained. They began to walk slowly, deliberately, down the central aisle. The MC, seeing the disaster unfold, frantically tried to regain control, speaking into his lapel mic. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to... But no sound came from the speakers. I had made sure of it. His microphone was dead. Mine, however, was locked open, controlled from the AV booth. Every sound on the stage was being captured with perfect, crystalline clarity. The sound of Cassidy's ragged, hyperventilating breaths, the sound of Julian Croft's muttered curses, the sound of a life, a career, and a wedding. All imploding at once. The entire room could hear their world ending. The lead counsel, a woman with iron-gray hair and the unforgiving eyes of a predator, walked onto the stage. She did not acknowledge the audience. Her focus was entirely on my sister. In her hand, she held the affidavit I had given Cassidy on the rooftop. She placed it on the lectern. "Ms. Vale," she said, her voice calm and devoid of pity. "Please read the document, aloud." Cassidy stared at the paper, her body trembling so violently I thought she might collapse. For a moment, she seemed unable to breathe, her eyes wide with the final dawning horror of her public immolation. Julian Croft started to say something, a strangled protest, but the counsel shot him a look that was pure ice, and he fell silent. With a shaking hand, Cassidy gripped the edges of the lectern. She began to read. Her voice was a raw, broken whisper, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, every word was perfectly, horribly clear. "I, Cassidy Vale, do hereby affirm that I knowingly and willfully conspired with Hearthaven Capital Chief Financial Officer, Julian Croft, to create a fraudulent vendor entity known as Arcturus Ledger." She read it all, the creation of the shell companies, the use of the Grant Riven alias, the theft of my digital signature via the Charity Drive email list, the fabrication of the accelerated integration fee to embezzle an amount equal to her department's bonus pool. She named names, dates, and methods. It was not a speech. It was a vivisection, performed on herself, under the hot, unforgiving stage lights. As she spoke Julian's name, 2 members of Hearthaven's corporate security team, who had entered with the auditors, moved to his side. They didn't touch him. They just stood there, a quiet, immovable presence. When Cassidy's voice faltered, the lead counsel prompted her gently. "Continue, Ms. Vale." Julian, his face a mottled mask of rage and sweat beneath the melting makeup, finally broke. He turned to flee the stage. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone. His last lifeline to a world where he still had power. Before he could dial, one of the security guards stepped smoothly in front of him, holding out an evidence bag. "Your phone, Mr. Croft. We'll need to secure it." His authority had vanished. He was no longer an executive. He was a liability being contained. He was escorted out a side door, not as a guest, but as a suspect. Cassidy finished reading, her voice trailing off into a choked sob. The document hung in the air, a testament to her complete and total capitulation. I stepped forward to the lectern again. I clicked to the next slide. The screen behind us once again showed the video file from the anonymous USB, the dark monitor, the reflected silhouette, the glowing crescent scar. "There has been some ambiguity," I said, my voice clinical, "about the identity of the individual who performed this action." I clicked again. A second image appeared on the screen, next to the first. It was a professional photograph, a high-resolution close-up from Cassidy's own online engagement album. It was a shot of her hand, showing off her diamond ring, and on the inside of her wrist, captured in perfect, romantic detail, was the identical, silvery, crescent moon scar. The digital ghost now had a face. The crime now had her fingerprint. Cassidy looked up at the 2 images, the shadowy act of forgery and the bright, happy picture of her engagement. and a terrible, ragged sound tore from her throat. "I didn't think it would go this far," she choked out. The words addressed to me, to the room, to no one. It was the pathetic, universal cry of the caught. I looked at her, not as a sister, but as an auditor closing a file. "You went so far," I said, my voice cutting through her tears, "that you ended up right back where you started, with nothing." At this, Marcus Thorne, our CEO, finally seemed to regain his senses. He walked to the center of the stage, his face pale but his voice firm. He was a man desperately trying to reclaim control of his own ship. "Effective immediately," he announced, his voice booming with renewed authority. "Hardhaven Capital is suspending all contracts and business with the entity known as Arcturus Ledger. We are launching a full, independent, special investigation into this matter, with the complete cooperation of law enforcement. Furthermore," he added, looking directly at me, "this company has a zero-tolerance policy for retaliation. The whistleblower in this case will be afforded every protection under our corporate charter and the law." The guests, a silent, stunned sea of horrified faces, remained motionless. They were no longer at a party. They were witnesses at a public execution. The only sound in the vast ballroom was the soft, continuous hiss of the air conditioning, a cold, mechanical sound like rain on a window pane. In the midst of the wreckage, I turned to my sister one last time. She was weeping, her beautiful dress a cruel mockery of the celebration she had planned. I leaned in close, my voice for her ears alone. "I've met your fiancé now," I said. Then I turned back to the lectern for the final act, on the screen. I navigated away from the slideshow and opened a live session of the Hardhaven Vendor Management Portal. The Arcturus Ledger account was displayed prominently. I moved the cursor over the account status field. It currently read, "Active." I clicked the drop-down menu. I selected the final option on the list, and I clicked Save. The screen refreshed, and there, in the center of the giant screen, for the entire room to see, the status of Arcturus Ledger changed. A single word appeared, rendered in a brutal, final, blood-red font. "Terminated." It hung there, glowing in the silent room, as stark and definitive as a tombstone. The party was over. No one needed to be told to leave. They simply began to drift away, dissolving into the night, leaving the wreckage behind. The room they put us in was a backstage holding area, a place designed for transitions. It had the sterile, anonymous feel of a place where one costume is shed for another. A rolling rack of discarded coats stood in one corner, a vanity mirror, its frame studded with cold, dead bulbs, reflected a distorted version of the chaos we had just left behind. The air was cold, smelling faintly of dust and wilted flowers. It was a room without a past or a future, a perfect purgatory. Cassidy was sitting on a low ottoman, her beautiful cream dress pooled around her like spilled milk. With slow, clumsy fingers, she was pulling the pins from her hair, the elaborate bridal updo coming undone in limp, defeated strands. Her face was swollen from crying, her eyes red-rimmed and empty. The magnificent diamond ring on her finger seemed like a cruel joke, a glittering monument to a future that had just been publicly executed. I stood by the door, not wanting to get any closer. The emotional shrapnel was still thick in the air. I had done what I needed to do, and now all that was left was the grim, quiet work of sorting through the debris. She finally pulled the last pin free, and her hair tumbled down around her shoulders. She looked up at me, her reflection a pale, broken thing in the dark mirror. Her voice, when she spoke, was raspy and hollow, a sound scraped from the bottom of an empty well. "Were you ever jealous of me, Rowan?" The question was so absurd, so profoundly disconnected from the reality of our situation, that for a moment I could only stare at her. It was the question of a child, asked in the ruins of an adult catastrophe she had single-handedly engineered. I thought back over the years, a quick, cold audit of our shared history, her effortless popularity, my academic achievements, her social grace, my analytical mind. Two parallel lives, forever measured against each other by everyone, including ourselves. Yes, I said. The admission was a small, hard stone in my mouth. For 3 minutes, in 2009. She looked confused, her brow furrowing. What happened in 2009? You were elected homecoming queen, I said, my voice flat. You stood on the football field under the Friday night lights, and they put a cheap plastic crown on your head, and everyone was cheering for you. And for about 3 minutes, I wondered what that felt like. To be loved for nothing more than just being. I paused, letting the memory fade. And then I went home and finished my advanced calculus homework, because I had a test on Monday. Then I got busy living my life. The answer seemed to drain the last of the fight from her. The bitter resentment that had fueled her for so long had been predicated on the idea that I was the one who had everything, that my life was an effortless series of victories. The truth, that I barely thought of her triumphs or failures at all, was a far crueler verdict. I walked over to the small table beside her and placed my briefcase on it. I opened it and took out a thick sheaf of papers, bound in a neat, legal-looking cover. I placed it on her lap, on top of the expensive fabric of her ruined dress. This is a quitclaim agreement, I explained, my voice all business now. It legally transfers your full ownership of all assets held by North Alder Ventures to a trust controlled by Hearthaven Capital. It also contains a full acknowledgement of the debt owed, and it outlines a repayment schedule from your personal accounts for any outstanding balance after liquidation. It's your confession, codified. She stared down at the document as if it were a venomous snake. What is this? This is the only part of your life you still have control over, I said, my voice sharp, pulling her back from the edge of self-pity. The board wants their money back, all of it. The SEC will want a conviction. This document is the only thing that stands between you and a federal indictment for securities fraud, on top of everything else. By proactively making the company whole, you demonstrate remorse. You become a cooperating party, not just a cooperating witness. It might save you years. Cassidy, it is the only move you have left to make. I looked her straight in the eye. Sign it. This is the only way you can save yourself. She picked up the document, her hands trembling so much the papers rattled. She read the first page, her lips moving silently. She saw the numbers, the cold, hard accounting of her crime. The fantasy was over. This was the bill. I placed a pen on top of the papers. Sign it. She took the pen. Her knuckles were white. For a long moment, she just held it, poised over the signature line. Then, with a long, shuddering exhale that sounded like the last breath leaving a body, she signed her name. The signature was jagged and broken, nothing like her usual confident script. It was the signature of a ghost. I took the signed papers from her, checked the signature, and placed them carefully back in my briefcase. I took out my tablet and my phone. I photographed each page, converting them into a secure PDF. Then I uploaded the file to the encrypted cloud server I had named Terrace. As the final security measure, the system asked for a password to seal the file. I typed in a sequence of 8 digits, our adoptive mother's birthday, the one date in our fractured family that was supposed to represent a new beginning. The file was locked. The evidence was preserved. From the hallway outside our room, I could hear the muffled sounds of the corporate cleanup crew already at work, the scrape of a chair being pulled across a floor. A low, tired voice I recognized as belonging to our head of human resources, the sharp, decisive tones of the independent counsel. A wedding party had turned into a crisis management meeting. They were already working on the press release, on the narrative that would save the company's reputation. Cassidy's personal tragedy was already just another line item in a damage control budget. I closed my briefcase, the clicks of the latches sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. It was the invitation to her wedding, the one that had finally arrived in my inbox. I had never opened it. I placed it on the ottoman beside her. "You can still have a wedding if you want," I said, my voice quiet, matter of fact. "But it won't be to him, and it won't be paid for with my money." She flinched as if I had struck her. She didn't look at the invitation. She just stared at the floor, a broken doll in a ruined dress. There was nothing left to say. The accounts had been reconciled. The file was closed. I had come for my name, and I had taken it back. The rest was just noise. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there with the unopened invitation to a future that would never happen. I walked down the long, empty corridor, the sound of my own footsteps the only thing accompanying me. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sadness. I felt quiet. A profound and total silence had settled in the place where all the anger and suspicion had been. I walked out of the hotel and into the cold night air, wearing that silence like a new perfume. The next morning, the Hearthaven Capital Internal News Digest landed in every employee's inbox with the quiet, devastating impact of a guillotine. The headline was stripped of all euphemism, a testament to the new era of radical transparency I had just inaugurated. Hearthaven terminates Arcturus Ledger contract, launches full investigation into alleged fraudulent activities. The article was brief, clinical, and brutal. It named Julian Croft, announcing his immediate termination and noting the company was cooperating fully with external authorities. It mentioned Cassidy's name only as an employee from the strategic partnerships team, who was also no longer with the company. She had been erased with corporate boilerplate. My name was mentioned once, in a carefully worded sentence crafted by a team of lawyers. The irregularities were first identified and escalated by Rowan Vale, Director of Internal Controls. It was a sterile, factual statement, but in the context of our whisper network-driven corporate culture, it was a coronation. The email from the audit committee arrived an hour later. It was a formal summons, but the tone was deferential. They referred to me as the primary source and requested a full debriefing at my earliest convenience. I replied with a single, declarative sentence that required no further explanation. I was just taking my name back. An hour after that, I was called into Marcus Thorne's office. The CEO looked like a man who had aged a decade overnight. The cocksure bravado was gone, replaced by a weary, haunted look. He gestured for me to sit, not in the guest chair, but at the conference table, as a peer. "Rowan," he began, his voice raspy. "What you did, it was surgical. You saved this company from a catastrophe of its own making." He slid a folder across the polished wood table. "The board has approved the formation of a new digital integrity task force. Its first mandate will be to completely overhaul our digital signature and vendor verification protocols from the ground up. They want you to lead it. You'll have unlimited resources, full autonomy, and a direct line to the board." It was the ultimate prize, a kingdom of my own, built on the rubble of the one I had just torn down. I looked at the folder, at the offer of more power, more responsibility, more work. I thought of the long nights, the endless analysis, the cold fury that had fueled me for weeks. "I accept," I said, my voice even. I stood up, the meeting clearly over. As I reached the door, I paused and turned back. "Marcus," I said. He looked up, his eyes hopeful. "I'm submitting a request for 1 day of personal leave, effective immediately." I didn't wait for his approval. I walked out, leaving him in the silent, cavernous office. I didn't go home. I walked through the cold, bright afternoon, my path taking me, perhaps inevitably, toward the waterfront. I found myself standing across the street from the Halcyon Quay. The sun glinted off its towering glass facade, making it look like a shard of ice. High above, on the rooftop, I could just make out the glass enclosure of the terrace bar, a silent, empty stage. At the hotel's main entrance, 2 workers were on a hydraulic lift, methodically stripping a large celebratory banner from the marble archway. It was cream and gold, and I could still read the ghost of the lettering as they peeled it away. "Congratulations, Cassidy and Grant." It came off in long, ragged strips, leaving behind faint, sticky rectangles of adhesive residue, the pale scars of a story that had been violently erased. I took out my phone, The screen felt cold against my thumb. I thought for a long time, composing and deleting messages in my head. There were 1,000 things I could have said, accusations, recriminations, perhaps even a word of pity. In the end, I chose none of them. I wrote a single line, a piece of advice that was also a final, clean severance. If you want to start over, live under your own name. I hit send. A few minutes later, as I was turning to leave, my phone buzzed. A reply. I'll try. I read the 2 words. I understood the chasm of effort and pain that lay behind them, and then I put the phone back in my pocket. I did not reply. It was no longer my conversation to continue. My steps led me back to the hotel, through the lobby, and into the elevator. I pressed the button for the roof. I needed to stand at the scene of the final confession, to close the last loop. The door to the terrace opened, and the wind hit me, a clean, cold blast that smelled of the distant sea. It pushed back the stale, lingering scent of the night before. The ghost of spilled champagne and panicked sweat. The rooftop was empty, scrubbed clean. The city spread out below me, a vast, indifferent grid of steel and light. I stood at the edge, looking down at the ceaseless flow of traffic. A city bus, its side a giant, scrolling LED screen, paused at the intersection below. The text was part of a local news update, scrolling in bright red letters. For a moment, it was just a blur of information. Then the words resolved into focus. Hearthaven Capital CFO fired amid fraud allegations. Whistleblower praised. A moment later, a radio broadcast from a car waiting at the light drifted up to me. A faint, disembodied voice on the wind. The announcer was talking about the Hearthaven story. And then she said my name, a stranger, speaking into a microphone miles away, reporting on the facts, on the official record. She said my name clearly, correctly, and with authority. The name my sister had tried to steal. The name Julian Croft had tried to forge. The name I had been forced to defend. Was now back where it belonged. Not just mine, but a matter of public fact. It was returned to me, in their voice. I took out my tablet. I opened the secure folder, the one that held all the evidence, all the proof, all the pain of the last few weeks. I looked at the folder name one last time. Terrace. I tapped the screen, and in the folder's properties, I changed its status, a single word. Closed. I powered down the screen. The reflection of my own face stared back at me for a moment before the screen went dark, and there was nothing left. The story was over. It ended here, right where it was supposed to. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and if you want to help this story reach more people, please support it by hitting the hype button. Your support means the world.